If there's downtime before harvest, the end of the 2017 growing year could be an opportunity for farmers to make sure their irrigation systems are running at peak efficiency. Nebraska Extension Steve Melvin says producers should look at operating pressure, flow, and the performance of their sprinkler packages to see if any improvements can be made. We talked with Steve at last week's Husker Harvest Days and asked why it could be beneficial to take one last look at pivots before shutting down for the off-season.
Right now makes a great time because you not only can still run the pivot, go out and start it up again and take a look at it and see how things are working, but you can also look at the crop that was irrigated this summer.
So operating pressure, you say, is one of the first things you should look at. Tell me what you should do.
A lot of times pressure gauges don't last real well, and so it's good to make sure the pressure gauge is working. If it's not, get a new one and put on it and take a look at the pressure. If the pressure is correct, the system's working correct. If it's not, it doesn't exactly tell you what's wrong with the system, but it gives you an indication you need to look. Flow meters, if you have those, are also an important thing to look at, but pressure is certainly the most important.
Are there any guidelines for positioning the system when you test that?
No, just start it up in some place where you can run it and take a look at it. Visually, you can look at the sprinkler pattern coming out of it if it's above the canopy of the crop, and then it's kind of nice to have the sun kind of in the foreground of your pivot and get kind of that gleam off the water, and you can really get a good look at the sprinkler, and it should be a nice uniform pattern, getting from more at the outside edge to a little less as you come inside.
So looking at pressure and flow doesn't matter if it's uphill or downhill or completely level land?
If you've got pressure regulators on it, which most systems do anymore, it really shouldn't matter if it's uphill or downhill. You should have the correct pressure at the nozzle. Now that's assuming you've got the correct pressure at the pivot point. And if it's too low, then you may, if you've got the pivot uphill, you may see that you run out of pressure towards the out end. And if you've got that situation, it's always good to check the pressure at the out end when it's on the highest point of the field.
Anything on the pump that you should be checking, or any quick fixes that might be there if you do notice some problems?
Well, most guys, are not probably going to do their own pump work, but if there's a problem, try to figure out what's going on. You may want to get your pump guy to come look, but did the pressure the pressure drop because of excess flow, because there's leaks or something like that? Is the water level dropped off, and so you really need to change something with the pump, or is the pump worn out, or need replaced? So there's lots of things you might find with why the pressure would be low, and the pump could certainly be one of them.
Sprinklers?
Sprinklers are really where the rubber meets the road, and so you want to make sure they're working correctly. Again, take a quick look at them and see if they're working right. About 10 years, 10,000 hours, something in that range is when you need to start looking at replacing them under a normal situation, and make sure they're working right. There's some new innovative sprinklers out there that may be better than the ones that are on the system and may be worth updating just for the newer technology.
If you're waiting around until you bring the combine out, can you rely on something like a yield monitor to try and find problems from irrigation systems?
Not typically. Typically, you might see it from an aerial photo or something where you can see some rings out there in the field. They're going to match up the direction the pivot turns around the field. But typically with a yield monitor, you're harvesting some areas that are good and some that aren't good, and it'll usually average it out. And so if it's got to be a very major problem to see it with a yield monitor on a combine.
Some of these problems, Steve, not necessarily a financial number here, but how big of a problem can they be for an operation?
Well, sprinkler packages aren't that expensive in the scheme of things compared to the energy it takes to pump water. And so, a lot of times the economics come in very well to taking a look at replacing the sprinkler package. And, they last about a third as long as the center pivot. And so, you really need to, just because the pivot isn't worn out, certainly the sprinkler package can be.